Most students don't study. They act as someone who studies. They buy highlighters, they organize folders, they create color-coded schedules, they watch videos about studying. Then, somehow spend 3 hours preparing to learn for 30 minutes. Imagine going to the gym and spending your entire workout adjusting the bench. That's what studying looks like for a shocking number of people. And the weirdest part, the students who spend the most time studying are often not the students learning the fastest. Because studying longer and learning faster are not the same thing. In fact, they're often opposites. The biggest lie in education is that learning is mostly about time. It's not. Learning is about friction. Specifically, the amount of friction your brain experiences when trying to retrieve information. Let me explain. Imagine I hand you a list of 20 words. You read them 5 times. They feel familiar. You think you've learned them. Then, I take the paper away and ask you to recall them. Suddenly, your brain starts buffering like a laptop with 37 Chrome tabs open. Why? Because recognition and recall are completely different skills. Most students spend their study sessions recognizing information. The exam measures whether they can recall it. That's like training for a football match by watching football. You'll understand the game. You just won't be very good at playing it. This is why rereading notes feels productive. Your brain sees information and says, "Oh yes, I've seen this before." And you mistake familiarity for learning, but familiarity is cheap. Your name is familiar. That doesn't mean you're studying it. Real learning starts when information disappears, and you have to pull it back out yourself. That's why the first technique feels almost unfair. Stop rereading. Start retrieving. Close the book, hide the notes, then force yourself to explain everything you remember. Not because it's fun, it's not. Nobody enjoys discovering their memory has the structural integrity of wet cardboard. But that discomfort is exactly where learning happens. Think about lifting weights. The muscle grows because of resistance. Memory works similarly. The struggle to retrieve information strengthens the memory itself. Every time your brain has to work to find an answer, it gets slightly better at finding it again. Which means the best studying often feels worse than bad studying. Bad studying feels smooth. Good studying feels difficult. That's a very important distinction. Now here's where things get interesting. Most students wait until they understand everything before testing themselves. This is backwards. Imagine learning to drive. Would you spend 6 months reading the manual before touching a steering wheel? Of course not. You'd crash into a hedge long before then. Yet students do this constantly. They read again, highlight, summarize, read again, and only then attempt questions. The fastest learners flip the order. They test early, they test often. They discover gaps immediately, because every wrong answer is useful information. Wrong answers tell you exactly where to focus. Rereading tells you almost nothing. Think about GPS navigation. If you're already on the correct road, the GPS doesn't need to say much. But the moment you take a wrong turn, it becomes extremely useful. Mistakes work the same way. The mistake isn't the problem. The mistake is the map. And students who learn fastest collect lots of maps. Now let's talk about another massive mistake. Studying for 6 straight hours. People love marathon study sessions, mostly because they look impressive. There's something romantic about sitting in a library surrounded by books and caffeine. Unfortunately, your brain doesn't care about aesthetics. After a certain point, attention starts dropping. Retention drops, learning quality drops. You stay seated, but mentally you've already left the building. It's like trying to sprint for 6 hours. The body wasn't designed for it. Neither was your attention. The fastest learners don't necessarily study more. They study sharper. 1 focused hour can easily beat 3 distracted hours. And if you've ever studied while checking your phone every 4 minutes, you know exactly what I mean. That's not studying. That's studying's distant cousin. Imagine reading 1 page, then stopping to watch a TikTok, then another page, then a text message, then Instagram, then another page. Your brain is basically playing educational ping pong. It never stays in one place long enough to build momentum. Deep focus creates speed. Distraction destroys it, which leads to the most unfair advantage of all. Most students think learning happens when information enters the brain. It doesn't. Learning happens when information comes back out. And the students who understand that single idea end up looking much smarter than everyone else. Not because they were born smarter, because they're practicing the skill the exam actually measures. And once you realize that, studying becomes much less about consuming information and much more about proving you can retrieve it. Now here's the funny part. Everything we've talked about so far is already enough to put you ahead of most students, which sounds impressive until you realize what most students are doing. Many of them are trying to memorize information once and somehow expecting their brain to remember it forever. That's not learning. That's wishful thinking with stationery. Your brain forgets things, constantly, aggressively. In fact, forgetting is one of your brain's favorite hobbies. You can spend 2 hours studying something on Monday, and by Friday, your memory has treated it like an old New Year's resolution. Gone. This is why the next technique feels almost unfair. Don't study information once. Study it multiple times with gaps in between. Imagine trying to keep a campfire alive. You don't throw all the wood on at once, you add fuel periodically. Memory works similarly. Every time you revisit information just as you're about to forget it, the memory becomes stronger. And here's the best part. Each review becomes shorter. The first session might take an hour. The next review takes 15 minutes, then 5, then 2. Meanwhile, another student is relearning the entire chapter from scratch because they waited 3 weeks. It's the educational equivalent of repeatedly losing your car keys and then blaming the car. Now let's talk about something students almost never do. Teaching. The moment you can explain an idea simply, you actually understand it. Until then, you're often just borrowing someone else's explanation. A great test is this. Imagine explaining the topic to a 12-year-old. No jargon, no textbook language, no pretending you understand, just simple words. If you can't do that, there's usually a gap somewhere, and that's useful, because confusion hidden behind fancy language is still confusion. Some students can recite entire textbook paragraphs and still have no idea what they actually mean. They're basically human copy-paste machines. The fastest learners simplify everything. They translate complex ideas into normal language because understanding beats memorization every time. Now here's another advantage that feels illegal. Study questions, not chapters. Most students start with, "What do I need to read?" The better question is, "What could I be asked?" Think about how absurd it would be if a football player spent all season studying grass. The field matters, but the game matters more. Exams work similarly. You're not being tested on how many pages you read. You're being tested on your ability to answer questions, so spend more time answering them. The students who constantly practice questions are essentially training on the actual battlefield. Everyone else is reading the instruction manual. And then comes the final secret, the thing that makes everything else work. Most students measure studying by time. Fast learners measure studying by outcomes. One student says, "I studied for 5 hours." The other says, "I can answer 80% of the questions correctly." Guess which metric matters? Nobody gets extra points because studying felt difficult. Nobody gets bonus marks because they spent all weekend in the library. The exam doesn't care. Results care about results. Which means your goal should never be to spend more. Isn't always the one with the highest IQ. It's often the one using the best system. The student who tests themselves, retrieves information, reviews strategically, practices questions, teaches concepts, protects their focus. And while everyone else is trying to study harder, they're studying smarter. Which sounds like a cliche, until you realize it actually works. Because learning faster isn't magic. It's not genetics. It's not some secret technique hidden in a monastery by studying monks. It's understanding how memory actually works and then cooperating with it instead of fighting it. And once you do that, something interesting happens. Studying starts taking less time, your grades improve, your confidence improves, and people start assuming you're naturally smart, which is always funny. Because the whole time you were just using your brain the way it was designed to be used. And in a world where most students are still highlighting entire textbooks like they're trying to paint a fence, that advantage can feel almost illegal.